That was very appropriate. Good morning, church. How are you this morning? Wonderful to be here. And I do want to give thanks to Pastor Kirsty for giving me the opportunity to be here for a few weeks in a row. It's nice to be able to preach, every once in a while, but sometimes it's hard to get into a rhythm if you're only preaching once in a while. So this allows me to get into a rhythm. It also allows me to preach on a topic that is very close to my heart. As a woman pastor, to preach on something close to my heart. And after the last time that I preached on Sarah and Hagar. And after the worship, someone came up to me and said, I was so excited to hear to know that we were going to hear about women. And so I thought, you know what? I think this is a perfect opportunity to give some more of that to the church. So I am glad to be here. Please join me in prayer. God of our hearts, be with us today. God of our minds, be with us today. God of our ears, be with us today. God of our mouths, be with us today. So we do begin a 4-week sermon series, Women Who Move Mountains. Each sermon will feature a particular or specific women who portray a specific characteristic. Now, obviously, from our Wednesday night service, I could have picked all kinds of characteristics for Mary Magdalene, but I picked faithfulness, and hopefully I will explain later why. So we do start with Mary Magdalene. Her name comes from the fact that she was from Magdala, a village on the shore of the Sea of Galilee. Hence her name, Mary of Magdala, or Mary Magdalene. From the New Testament, one can conclude that Mary of Magdala was a leading figure among those attracted to Jesus. When the men in that company, and I promise men, this is not to be an attack on you, but when they abandoned him at the hour of his greatest need, Mary of Magdala was one of the women who stayed with him, even to the crucifixion. In John's gospel, which we heard today, she was present at the tomb, the first person to whom Jesus appeared after his resurrection, and the first to preach the good news of that miracle. Mary Magdalene appears as a witness to the resurrection in every one of the Gospels, as she is at or near the tomb in all accounts. Her name usually appears first when the women followers of Jesus are mentioned. So it seems that Mary Magdalene led a group of women who were prominent followers of Jesus the Christ. They were the main witnesses of all the key events in Jesus' life. So while we may think of only men being disciples, my friends, the women were there too. They were there during his ministry in Galilee and Judea. They were there at his crucifixion. They were there at his death and burial. And they were there at his resurrection. Chronologically in the Gospels, Mary of Magdala is mentioned the earliest in Luke's account. In chapter 8, verses 1 through 3, we are told the 12 were with Jesus, as well as some women who were cured of evil spirits and infirmity. Mary, called Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had gone out, and Joanna, the wife of Herod's steward Chuza, and Susanna, and many others, who provided for them out of their resources. 2 things of note are implied in this passage. First, the women provided for Jesus and the 12, which suggests the women were well-to-do, respectable figures. It is speculated by some scholars that Mary of Magdala was a wealthy older widow, not the prostitute as she is often betrayed. This makes sense to me because she would not have very likely, would not have had any resources out of which to provide for the disciples, because it is rare, even now, that a prostitute is wealthy. Second, all the women mentioned in this passage of Luke have been cured of something, including Mary of Magdalene. The 7 demons, as applied to her, indicates an ailment of a certain severity, not necessarily possession by demons. In early texts, her status as an apostle rivaled even that of Peter. In fact, there is an icon that shows Mary Magdalene going to the 12 disciples, as she does in the end of our story. So she is considered the apostle to the apostles. There were many people in the early Jesus movement who saw Mary as an important figure in Christianity. She even has her own gospel, although it was not sanctioned by the early church fathers as being worthy of being included in the Bible. Nevertheless, she was held up as an example, especially by women of faith in early Christianity. Our gospel story today, which we usually hear on Easter Sunday, exemplifies why Mary Magdalene has been and still is considered an important figure in Christian tradition. According to John's resurrection story, Mary Magdalene came to the garden while it was still dark. I was out walking the dogs this morning in the dark. It's kind of scary being out in the dark. We are not told why she came to the garden while it was still dark, but it took much courage to do so. She had traveled by herself, at least we assume so, because no traveling companions are mentioned. I want to know if she told anyone else where she was going, and if so, did anyone try to stop her? More so, why did not anyone else go with her? I hope they did at least try to stop her, because it was dangerous, and still is, for a woman to travel alone. But her need to visit the place where Jesus was entombed overrode any concerns about her safety. When she arrived at the tomb, she was shocked to find the stone had been removed. So she retraced her steps. I think she ran back to tell Simon Peter and the other disciples what had happened. These 2 disciples ran to the tomb and discover the body is gone. We are told, quote, the other disciple saw and believed, unquote. Well, what did he believe? That Jesus was resurrected? No. Let's be clear, no. He believed that Mary of Magdala was telling the truth when she had told them that the stone had been rolled away, because they were not going to believe her, a woman, without seeing proof. The testimony of women at this time in history was considered so suspect, they could not testify in court. They were not to be believed. The men had to see the tomb was empty, or the stone had been rolled away, for themselves. After verifying Mary's story, and in fact verifying the tomb was empty, they returned to their home. But Mary stood weeping outside the tomb, we are told. We are not told Mary had returned with the men, but apparently she had come back. And when the men left, logically, it seems like she should have gone with them. She does not. She stays at the tomb. She looks into the tomb, which she had not done before. She didn't know that Jesus' body was gone. She only knew the stone had been removed. And when she looks into the tomb, she sees something that the men had not. 2 angels in white sitting where the body of Jesus had been laying. Further, the angel spoke to her. We may ask why she was treated to this experience when the men were not. Perhaps it is because of her faithfulness. Even though Jesus was dead, or at least she thought he was, she came to the tomb. Even though it was dangerous to be out by herself, she came to the tomb. Even though there didn't seem to be any reason to stay at the tomb, she did not leave. Even though hopelessness should have ruled the day, she seemed to hope there was something more. Her faithfulness overcame her despair. I want to ask this question. How many of us would act the same as Mary Magdalene if we looked in the tomb that had been confirmed to be empty and found two angels who spoke to us? I don't know about you, but I think I would either run away so fast that I would beat the two disciples home, or I would be paralyzed by fear. Not Mary Magdalene. Instead, she simply responded, "They have taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they have laid him." Her faithfulness was stronger than her fear. At that very moment, Jesus appeared to her. She did not recognize him at first, but that changed when he spoke her name. The question was asked at the Wednesday night service, the Wednesday night small group. Why was that the pivotal moment? I could go off on a bunny trail here, but suffices to say the people of the ancient Near East believed that a person could hold great power over another if that person knew and spoke the other person's name. It is one explanation as to why God, when asked by Moses God's name, refused to give it to him. Jesus knew Mary's name. There could have been another explanation, though. According to Jesus in John 10, the sheep know the shepherd's voice. Mary knew Jesus' voice. Remember earlier when I said we tend to not think about the disciples, including men and women? There is a film that is, I'm going to say, an accurate depiction. It is kind of a line-by-line depiction of the Gospel of John. And interestingly, and I really like this, Mary Magdalene is shown in many of those scenes where Jesus is teaching. Now, she's not out in front, she's not at Jesus' feet, she's not gathered around the table, but she's maybe behind a pillar, or she's hanging out at the periphery. She knew Jesus' voice. However, the time of listening was over and the time of doing had begun. Jesus commanded her to go and tell, and so she did, without question or hesitation. This act particularly required a lot of faith because she knew she would not be believed. Remember, the stone was gone. She went and told Simon Peter and the other disciple they had to come and see, because we're not going to believe a woman. Oh, they're so not going to believe this. And she likely would face ridicule and backlash for telling such an absurd story. The tale of Mary Magdalene, the life story of Mary Magdalene, is that of a woman who walked in faithfulness to the Lord. On Wednesday, I asked if anyone had an example of women in their lives who displayed that same type of faithfulness. One who was lifted up was a grandmother who made a habit of reading scripture, who was dedicated to daily prayer for her family. She had pictures of the family set up in her prayer nook. She delivered Meals on Wheels into her 90s and inspired family members to follow in her footsteps. Mine are 3 particular female elders in the First United Methodist Church of Oshkosh, Nebraska. As a teenager, I tried to find a church home, but I couldn't seem to find a place where I felt the people, especially the women, because let's be real, women who are here, we can be nasty people. We can be nasty people. My background, until I got into ministry, was working mainly in male-dominated fields, and I liked it. And it wasn't because I had a bunch of men around me. It was because I didn't have a bunch of catty women around me. I attended one particular church, and in fact even joined the church because I loved the ritual, I loved the liturgy. And maybe it was because I had too high of expectations. That's a possibility. Maybe I wanted people to be perfect. And it could be that I found the women particularly grating because I spent more time around them than I did the men, because I was a teenager at that point in time, and so was with the women more. But wow, they could stab you in the back in a heartbeat and hug you from the front. Yes. The ladies of whom I speak up in the United Methodist Church, of course, this is many years later. Maybe I had matured, maybe I had grown, maybe my expectations had changed. But these three ladies, they were the epitome of faithfulness. They were there in that church come rain. I mean, the only time they were not there was when the church was canceled. They were in that church. And they sat with a quiet dignity. And you've not heard my story of how I came to faith, and I don't want to go down that bunny trail at this point in time. But let me just say that my walk to faith was pretty rough, and God had to get my attention pretty hard. And a lady came up to me after I had told my story, and she said, you know, maybe I don't have faith because I never experienced that. And I said, oh, yeah, you got faith. You got faith. You are my example of faithfulness. These three women were the reason I stayed in a church long enough to find my own faith and develop my own faithfulness. These women, the grandmother and the three women of whom I speak, they exemplified faithfulness to Christ and Christian teachings, and they made a difference in the world. So I want to leave you today with questions. I like sending people out with questions because I want you to ruminate through the week. Is our own walk of faithfulness such that we can visit the tomb, a representation of grief and loss, and a reminder that the world has turned upside down, even if dangers abound? Is our walk of faithfulness such that we can stay near the tomb when all seems hopeless? Have you ever felt hopelessness? I have too, and it's not a good place to be. Can we stay when everyone else has left? Now, I ask this question because I'm not going to assume that we're all United Methodists in this room, but I'm going to assume most of us are United Methodists in this room. We've got some issues, folks. And these issues aren't going to go away anytime soon. We've got a general conference coming up. And we've been dealing with this issue for a long, long time. And we've already got some United Methodist churches that are no longer United Methodist churches because they didn't want to stay. They didn't want to deal with that tomb. Is our walk of faithfulness such that we can believe when all signs say otherwise? Mary stayed at the tomb. Not only had the stone been rolled away, but Jesus' body was gone. 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 It was gone. Exactly. And nobody knew what had happened. Nobody knew why. I don't know if I could have stayed. I don't know if I would have continued to have faith as she did. Is our walk of faithfulness such that we can go as the Lord commanded, as the Lord still commands, even if we may face ridicule, disbelief, or persecution? Could we go as did Mary Magdalene? I invite you to ponder those questions. There won't be a quiz. I won't ask for responses next week. But I hope that you will take these questions into your heart and consider, could I do this? Can I do this? And if not, what do I need to do to find that faith and to be so faithful? We give thanks to God for the story of Mary Magdalene. Amen.